And we're very delighted to have in the studio with us Edmund Dawe, who's joining us today from Halifax. Edmund, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
And what brings you to Halifax today? Because your home is where?
My home is in a village of Alma, New Brunswick, which is a beautiful, beautiful location right at the entrance to Fundy National Park in New Brunswick, Canada. But I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia, adjudicating the senior piano classes at the local competitive music festival. And I'm here until tomorrow evening.
I see. And you do quite a bit of adjudicating and judging over the years, haven't you?
I have, yes. I've done a lot of music festivals from up north, Whitehorse in the Yukon, to St. John's, Newfoundland. So I've done quite a few.
Uh-huh.
It's always great to hear the young people and have the opportunity to encourage them and help them out if possible. And so I really enjoy it.
And speaking of young people, we're going to talk right now about your work as an educator and the dean. You've been a very successful administrator, but at Carnegie Hall in a few weeks, you'll be playing the Chopin Concerto in F minor. You'll be playing the entire piece or just a movement from it?
The entire concerto.
Oh, that'll be very exciting.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about your work as an educator. You were the dean at a school for 17 years. Which school was that? I have it.
I was 11 years dean at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, and then I had another 6 years as a department head at Mount Allison University in New Brunswick. So 11 years as dean. And Manitoba is a very culturally rich and diverse province. There's great support for the arts. When I first arrived, the music program had about 250 students, but we were in a building that had been built in the 1960s, designed for a maximum of 60 students.
Oh my.
So we had students practicing in stairwells. Any space that another faculty would give us to use, we would use it. So for 11 years, I worked very hard. We raised a lot of money. We built amazing new facilities, and there's so much support for the arts and opportunities for collaboration with many of the arts organizations in the city. So it was a great 11 years, and it's a very fine faculty of music.
Well, let's talk a minute about. I'm sure you have some experience with the state of music education, not necessarily at the collegiate level, but at the what we would call the grade school level in the United States. Now, here in the United States, for decades, it seems, we've been wailing about the lack of music education, particularly classical music, in the public schools, and it's a big problem. It seems in my field of classical music radio, we're always worried about the audience getting too old and we'll lose our audience, but it hasn't
Mm-hmm.
happened. But
No.
what is the state of classical music, or not necessarily classical music, but music education in the public schools in Canada compared to the U.S., if you have any knowledge about that?
Well, it varies from province to province because education is under provincial jurisdiction. Like it's not controlled by the federal government. So depending on where you are. So for example, my 11 years in Manitoba, Manitoba has a very strong public school music education program. Great choirs, bands, absolutely outstanding curriculum. Other provinces have gone through, say, more periods of challenge. I remember before we moved to Manitoba, my family and I lived in New Brunswick, Canada, and they went through a phase when my kids were growing up in school where they started hiring non-specialists to run the music programs in school. So you had, maybe a teacher who had minimum basic piano skills was suddenly the music instructor for the school. And I think it took a few years for them to learn that that's not working. And so it depends on where you are. So some provinces have stronger programs than others. In terms of audiences, I think orchestras are facing similar challenges that they are in the United States. I'm on the board of Symphony New Brunswick, and we've done very well. We managed to do reasonably well even through COVID with switching to, virtual concerts and so on. And, slowly but surely bringing in some new and younger audiences because a lot of, as you say, the audience for classical music generally seem to be aging, and so orchestras are coming up with different strategies to
Right.
through school concerts, movie nights, the type of program we do, the soloists we bring in. We do collaborations with local choirs to get audiences out there, all sorts of things. But so far so good. Just something you have to keep working at.
In my classical radio industry, people would ask me, "What's the average age of your listener?" And I would say about 93. Uh, not quite true, but
Yeah.
for us, getting a younger listener was getting somebody in their 40s.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Now you mentioned COVID, and I do want to. I note that during COVID, you decided to start a podcast,
That's right.
and the podcast is called "For Piano Teachers," and
Yes.
you started it in 2021. Tell
Yeah.
us about that. But it's also very successful. I found out before we went on.
It's been going very, very well. And so as you said, I started it during COVID when everything was shutting down and concerts weren't happening and teachers hadn't really switched to online learning and so on. So I just had the idea, well, perhaps I could start a podcast. So I did, and I did a couple of episodes, and I was really pleased to see the number of listeners. I expected that it would be localized, either in my home province or Atlantic Canada, and maybe some other connections I had throughout Canada. But I kept going with the episodes, and I think right now I have listeners in 107 countries, which is great. And it's great when they get in touch and you get the chance to communicate with teachers from different countries around the world. And I think we're all facing similar challenges when it comes to teaching. It's
Right.
interesting, as I mentioned to you before, that of all the episodes, the most popular one is how to motivate students.
hmm How
And
do
the
you
sec
motivate? So, what was the conclusion on that one? How do you do it?
Well, in the episode, I talk a lot about the choice of repertoire is so important, and the talked a lot about the teacher-student relationship, and giving students the ability to take ownership of some of the things they're doing, using quick studies so that as they're moving along, when you take a piece that they have the ability to learn completely on their own, how to build their confidence, how to offer them opportunities to share their music informally and formally in ways that will boost their confidence and motivate them. So there are all sorts of pointers in that episode.
And you did one episode with a rather well-known pianist. Tell us about that.
Well, I didn't not in the podcast, but many
Ah,
years ago, I interviewed Evgeny Kissin, and I was at the time I was interested in looking at the great pianists who had trained in at the Moscow Conservatory in particular, and I had spent time at the Juilliard archives, going through all of
right.
Rosina Levine, Adele Marcus' study with Joseph Levine. I spent a week at the Library of Congress going through the Rachmaninoff archives to see, just picking up any little tidbits I could of training that, with the curriculum that was being developed and that had been developed. This is pre-revolution in um, because the two conservatories in St. Petersburg and Moscow were started by the Rubinstein brothers, who had a patron who helped them start these. And at the beginning, I think it was around the 1860s, they were bemoaning the state of music education in Russia. And within 20, 30 years, they're producing some of the greatest pianists the world has ever seen. So I knew there were curriculum issues involved, and I was just interested. So I started digging into that research. And along the way, I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to interview a current pianist, uh, originally from Russia? So I contacted Evgeny Kissin's agent. I was able to meet him in Toronto after he performed Brahms' Second Concerto, and we talked briefly. But then he was going to be in London later when I was there, and I met him for an extensive interview about his training and so on. And it was very exciting, very
And that
exciting.
that paper was for a PhD you were writing, a thesis?
No, it was just my own research. I was
Oh,
just
I
working
see.
on, yeah, for my own teaching and for some presentations at conferences and so on. I just wanted to delve into that whole system of teaching and see what I could find.
Fascinating, fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
Well, as we mentioned, in a couple of weeks, you'll be at Carnegie Hall. Have you performed at Carnegie before?
No, I haven't. No, I've had the pleasure of being in New York before. For many years, I performed in a trio, a soprano, clarinet, and piano.
Yeah.
And of course, in addition to Shepherd on the Rock by Schubert, we performed a lot of other music and commissioned a lot of pieces. And we performed at Theodore Roosevelt House in Gramercy Park, had a chamber music series. I don't know if they still do or not, but in the late 90s, we performed there. Canadian Consulate, the Public Library. And we performed a lot internationally. So I've been to New York before, but I've not performed at Carnegie Hall. So I'm very excited about this one.
It's an unusual trio. You said soprano, clarinet, and piano.
That's right. And when we formed the trio, all three of us were colleagues at the same university. And the first question we were asked was, "Well, what are you going to perform
Right.
besides Shepherd on the Rock?" And we were very fortunate. Actually, that New York concert at Roosevelt House, I've never forgotten it, because one of the pieces we commissioned a really talented arranger to do an arrangement of four Gershwin songs, which we would often end the program with, and they were really incredibly well done arrangements. Anyway, we performed at Roosevelt House. It was an afternoon concert. This would be in the late 1990s, and there was a reception after the concert. And at the reception, this elderly couple came up to us. They were both in their early 90s, and they attended this series faithfully. They lived in the area. And so the elderly gentleman says to me, he says, I knew George Gershwin. And I was like, what? You knew? He said, yeah, when I first moved to New York, I was invited to a birthday party. So he said, I show up at the birthday party, and when I walked into the house, somebody was playing the piano. He said, it was so amazing. It sounded like a duet. It sounded like two people playing piano. So I looked in the corner, and there was this guy sitting at the piano. He said, it was phenomenal. And I said to the host, who is that? And the guy said, you don't know who that is? That's George Gershwin. So he said, I met Gershwin at the party, and then we occasionally met for coffee. And the best thing and he said, he said, if George were here today, he would have loved that arrangement. So I think that's the best compliment I think I've ever gotten after a performance. But
Yeah, that's a
that was
fantastic story.
1997, 1998, I think it was. And
Fa-
that the couple, they were already in their early 90s.
Fantastic story.
Yeah.
Tell us about the Chopin Concerto in F. What's your approach to that?
So the Chopin Concerto in F, Chopin composed it when he was 19 years old. He was a music student in Warsaw. even though it's Concerto Number 2, he actually composed it before Concerto Number 1, but it was published after Concerto
Right.
Number 1. Interesting that the second movement was inspired by, he had a major crush on a soprano, a fellow music student, and he never told her, but he did say to, I have it here somewhere, he did say to a friend in a letter, he said, I have met my ideal and have served her faithfully for 6 months without speaking to her about my feelings. I dream about it, and under her inspiration, the adagio from my concerto in F minor. So the slow movement, which is one of the most beautiful pieces I think he ever wrote, was inspired by his infatuation with the soprano. He never told her about his feelings. So it's, even though he was a teenager when he wrote it, it's so incredibly developed in terms of its writing for the piano. I mean, by this point, he was fully developed as a pianist anyway. He was one of their star students in terms of composition and music theory. So it's basically encapsulates, I think, very early on his entire style. So it's one of my favorite pieces.
Do you think about that love affair, or if you want to call it that, when you're playing it?
That second movement, especially, yeah, yeah. And later on in the letter, he talks about looking back, and you get to a part in the second movement at the end where part of the opening returns, and I sort of see that as him sort of looking back. You know, he's moved on, he's left Poland, he's now in Paris, and it's almost like he's looking back, you know,
Right.
later on in his life, and I get that very strong imagery in that second movement.
Well, Edmund Dawe, we're very eager to hear that performance, and it'll be online along with this interview. And I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
that movement on the last eight.